Imagine holding a winning lottery ticket worth $50 billion, only to watch it burst into flames in your own hands because you thought the fire would make it grow. In late 2020, Peloton wasn't just a fitness company, it was a cultural religion. At the height of the global pandemic, their valuation touched an astronomical $50 billion. They were moving more product than they could manufacture. Customers were waiting months just for the privilege of spending over $2,000 on a stationary bike. Yet barely 2 years later, this titan of the fitness world was hemorrhaging cash, freezing production, firing thousands of loyal employees, and watching its stock price plummet by over 95%. Peloton became the blockbuster video of the modern fitness era, a company that had the entire world in the palm of its hand, only to be completely obliterated by its own toxic cocktail of hubris, delusion, and catastrophic leadership. The contrast is almost unbelievable. How does a brand beloved by celebrities, presidents, and millions of die-hard evangelists secretly rot from the inside out while the world is cheering it on? How does a management team look at a temporary global lockdown and convince themselves they have permanently altered human behavior? The answer lies in a series of incredibly arrogant, desperate decisions made behind closed doors. Decisions that resulted in mountains of unsold, rusting equipment, devastating human casualties, and the evaporation of one of the fastest-built fortunes in corporate history. By the end of this story, you will see exactly how a masterclass in marketing morphed into a masterclass in self-destruction, and we will reveal the specific, mind-blowing miscalculation that doomed $50 billion to the corporate graveyard. To understand the magnitude of the collapse, you have to understand the genius of the illusion. Back in 2012, John Foley, an executive at Barnes & Noble, noticed a massive gap in the fitness market. Boutique fitness classes like SoulCycle were exploding in popularity. People were happily paying nearly $40 for 45 minutes of high-intensity, sweat-drenched, community-driven cardio. But the classes were inconvenient. You had to book days in advance, fight for a spot, and commute in the cold. Foley envisioned a world where you could bottle that exact lightning and pipe it directly into people's living rooms. The concept was simple, but revolutionary. Combine a high-quality, sleek stationary bike with a massive high-definition tablet and stream live elite fitness classes to the masses. The secret sauce wasn't just the metal and the pedals. It was the ecosystem. Peloton created a closed loop. They weren't just selling you a piece of gym equipment that would eventually turn into a very expensive clothing rack. They were selling you a subscription to a lifestyle. You bought the hardware for a premium, locking you in, and then you paid $39 a month for the software. It was the holy grail of business models, the Apple playbook applied to fitness, and it worked brilliantly. The instructors weren't just fitness trainers. They became mega influencers, therapists, and parasocial best friends to millions. When the world completely shut down in early 2020, Peloton went from being a luxury status symbol to an absolute psychological necessity for survival. As gyms shuttered across the globe, Peloton was the only game in town. The demand was so violent, so unprecedented, that the company's valuations skyrocketed. Wall Street couldn't get enough. Foley was heralded as a visionary. Media outlets praised them as the future of human wellness. For a brief, shining moment, Peloton was an untouchable empire. They had total market dominance. The illusion was perfect. They had convinced themselves, their investors, and the public that the pandemic wasn't an anomaly, but rather the new permanent reality of human existence. But no lockdown lasts forever. The first crack in the armor appeared exactly when the world began to heal. As vaccines rolled out and doors unlocked, people experienced a profound, universal craving to touch grass, to breathe fresh air, and to sweat in the same room as other human beings. The Great Reopening was the catalyst that set the countdown clock ticking. Internally, the data began to shift. The wait times for bikes dropped from months to weeks, then to days. But instead of reading the room and realizing that demand was normalizing, Peloton's executive team doubled down in the most disastrous way imaginable. They suffered from a fatal case of recency bias. Convinced that their pandemic peak was actually their new baseline, they engaged in aggressive, almost manic expansion. Behind closed doors, desperate to maintain the illusion of infinite growth for their shareholders, they committed over $400 million to build a massive manufacturing facility in Ohio. They bought the fitness equipment company Precor for hundreds of millions of dollars just to secure more factory space. They were wildly overordering parts, committing to billions of dollars in supply chain contracts for bikes and treadmills that, deep down, the shifting global economy was already rejecting. As the reality of the situation grew too massive to contain, the company's public image began to suffer catastrophic, uncontrollable blows. In a bizarre twist of fate, the fictional character Mr. Big from Sex and the City suffered a fatal heart attack after riding a Peloton in a highly anticipated television reboot. The company's stock immediately took a hit. Then came a much darker, all-too-real tragedy. Their newly launched Tread Plus machine was involved in a series of horrific accidents involving pets and young children, culminating in a tragic fatality. Instead of immediately recalling the dangerous product, Peloton arrogantly fought the Consumer Product Safety Commission, releasing defensive statements and refusing to admit fault. It was a PR nightmare that stripped away their friendly, community-first veneer, exposing a cold, desperate corporation willing to sacrifice its own reputation to protect its bottom line. The tension inside the company escalated to a boiling point. Warehouses were secretly filling up to the ceilings with thousands of unsold bikes. Cargo ships were arriving at ports carrying millions of dollars in inventory that literally no one wanted to buy. The music was stopping, but management kept dancing, terrified of what would happen when the lights finally came on. The exact moment the glass shattered was in early 2022. It wasn't a slow leak. It was a torrential, violent collapse. Internal documents and leaked emails made their way to investigative journalists, revealing the shocking truth. Peloton was temporarily halting all production of its connected fitness products. The demand had simply evaporated. The factories were going dark. The moment this news hit the financial wires, the stock market reaction was absolute carnage. The stock price, which had once soared majestically above $160 a share, went into freefall, eventually cratering to single digits. It was a complete financial bloodbath. The empire was bankrupt in spirit, if not entirely on paper. The fallout was swift, brutal, and overwhelmingly human. To save the sinking ship, the board forced John Foley, the founder who had once been hailed as a modern-day Steve Jobs, to step down as CEO. But the real victims weren't the executives with their golden parachutes. It was the everyday people. In a desperate bid to cut costs, Peloton orchestrated a massive, deeply impersonal corporate slaughter. Over 2,800 employees, the very people who had worked grueling hours to fulfill the pandemic demand, were fired in a single day. Many finding out their fate via cold, glitchy Zoom calls or suddenly deactivated keycards. Delivery drivers, warehouse workers, and customer service reps were cast aside as the company scrambled to undo its own reckless expansion. Concrete evidence of the sheer scale of the disaster was impossible to hide. Financial reports showed the company burning through hundreds of millions of dollars in cash every single quarter. Wall Street analysts tore into the executives on earnings calls, demanding to know how they had miscalculated so catastrophically. The vaunted Ohio factory, the crown jewel of their expansion plan, was quietly scrapped before a single bike ever rolled off its assembly line. The warehouses they had scrambled to secure were now financial black holes, bleeding rent to store rotting inventory. The great Peloton dream had devolved into a corporate horror story of epic proportions. So where are they now? The remnants of the $50 billion empire are currently fighting for sheer survival. Barry McCarthy, a former Netflix and Spotify executive, was brought in as a mercenary CEO to aggressively trim the fat, ultimately trying to pivot Peloton away from being a hardware company and into a purely digital app-based service. But even that proved to be an uphill battle against a bruised brand and a highly saturated market, leading to McCarthy eventually stepping down as well. John Foley quietly moved on to start a made-to-order rug company, a far cry from revolutionizing global human health. But if we zoom out, the story of Peloton is about so much more than stationary bikes or fitness fads. It is a terrifying exposition of a massive loophole in human psychology and the global financial system, the utter inability of extremely wealthy, powerful people to separate a black swan event from genuine, sustainable brilliance. Wall Street and Silicon Valley are completely addicted to the narrative of exponential, infinite growth. When the pandemic handed Peloton a winning lottery ticket, the executives looked in the mirror and convinced themselves they had earned it through their own sheer genius. They ignored the fundamental laws of gravity, assuming that because people were trapped in their homes, they would forever want to stay trapped in their homes. Peloton didn't just fail because people went back to the gym. They failed because they aggressively bet their entire existence on the darkest days of a global crisis lasting forever. It forces us to look at the very nature of corporate ambition and ask a deeply haunting question: in the relentless pursuit of infinite wealth, at what point does visionary leadership cross the invisible line into sheer, destructive delusion? And when the next global disruption inevitably occurs, who will be the next billion-dollar empire to mistake a temporary tragedy for permanent power?